Final session of the day then. So in pulling the agenda together for the day, we thought we would finish with a panel that talks a bit more broadly about education and what's going on in education and some of the things, some of the trends that we see across the market and across government and what they're trying to inflict, impose, encourage, depending on your words, in the education sector. Before we start, I appreciate there's a few people that have kind of disappeared early. How many people here use the kind of finance products? Just roughly a few people. How many people also have some kind of engagement product? Everybody? Okay, fine. So I'm delighted to have 4 people for me to fire some questions at. Though clearly I didn't get a chair, which is those chairs that make me look really short if I stick one of those on the chair. So first of all, should we go from one end to the other? Lily, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I'll start. My name is Lily Aaron. I'm Policy Manager for Europe for the ACCA. We're the global body for professional accountants. I handle our policy communications out to government across the region, and that includes the education brief. I also look at our Brexit and international trade briefs and a little bit of tax. But my education brief mostly focuses on diversity and inclusion, HE and FE, provision, as well as apprenticeships and technical education coming through.
Super.
Hello, my name is Sue Atkins. I'm the parenting expert on ITV This Morning and Disney Junior, BBC Radio. I write copiously around parenting, parental engagement and raising happy, confident, resilient children.
Hello, I'm Victoria Fitzgerald. I'm an independent financial and business consultant working with Multi-Academy Trust that is setting up a new or growing. But I've also worked with Multi-Academy Trust on the non-executive side. I've been chair of a Multi-Academy Trust in the South West. And I'm also recently accredited as a schools resource management advisor, which I hope we'll touch on later on.
I'm Ian Gates. My background is on the technology piece, so I've been working in public sector software since leaving school, which was clearly a long time ago. And in part of that, I had the fortune to be running RS's education division for a little while in last year. So for that, I'm also a member at a Multi-Academy Trust down in Wiltshire, which now has over 6 schools and over 5,000 pupils going on in there. Just to follow Winston's question, because I might as well get the question in first, we asked about which products you got. Can I just ask people in the room, are you support staff or teaching staff? We're just trying to know where we go. So are there any teaching staff here? So everyone else is more about kind of back office support and delivery. Brilliant, thank you.
Super. So let's start with a question for you, Sue. What do you think a successful school looks like, particularly around how they engage with parents and the broader community?
Really interesting. I think it's more than just an app and it's more than just sending a text message. I think it's about a positive ethos and mindset. It's about the culture of parental engagement, meaning for me, not just you turn up at the Christmas play or you stand in front of the table for the summer fair. It is actually about family learning and family engagement. That really intrigues me. And it's not about just parental involvement. It's this whole ethos, whether they're young children from nursery right the way up till they leave school. I think that you get involved in sort of being involved with the parents. I'm a former deputy head and class teacher for over 25 years. So I think there needs to be high levels of engagement, a very positive school ethos, and effective leadership, I think, really, as well, within the school.
Do you think schools are getting better at that over the years, or do you think it's getting tougher?
Gosh, that's a really leading question. I don't know. How do I know? I'm just working all the time really with parents and things really now. So I think the budgets have been cut, as we know in education, so therefore that affects continued professional development and has a knock-on effect around all sorts of aspects, whether that is truancy, discipline, behaviour, and supporting children. I mean, I was watching, I don't know if you saw it yesterday, the one show about banning the booths or losing the booths or something. That whole aspect as well around schools and their ethos around engaging children, making learning exciting and interesting. And that's why I think technology is so fascinating, because now it can be so personalised for a child, because we've known for years that children learn in their own way at their own speed. So through all these different suites of wonderful technology, we can actually help and encourage children as well and motivate them and develop their self-esteem.
And Victoria, do you see that role of technology becoming more important in the schools that you speak to, or do you think it's still a struggle for them to work out how to adopt it?
I mean, I think from the business side of things, which is mainly what I deal with, I think there's a lot to do around data capture. I think lots of you probably use financial systems. You can capture all your income and expenditure and balance sheets. But it's that more intelligent information now around how those resources are used. So pupil to teacher ratios, contact ratios. And I think there's a challenge there for technology to broaden that kind of financial and resource analysis and capture that information. So I think capturing that information in a really dynamic way will make schools more successful.
Wow. And I suppose you see that as well, Lily, do you, in the work that you do with schools and their finance systems?
I suppose ours is more on the engagement side, actually.
Okay.
So it tends to be about the quality of the outcome for the student. And I think ultimately schools are going to be looking to improve the most on what they're judged on, and that's, looking at the benchmarks that Ofsted set. And I think sort of shifting focus towards behaviour and setting a culture and mission statement for the school is really important. We're seeing a lot of changes coming around through sort of PSHE learning, work experience, making sure that careers advice is benchmarked to the Gatsby benchmarks. So it's sort of, rather than focusing on those sort of progress 8 scores, the classic English, maths and science, I think what we really try to talk through schools and I suppose right through to college and university is how can we make sure that the careers advice is well-rounded, that they're getting that sort of number of needed engagements with employers and the workplace and the training that they need for interviews. And again, I think that's where technology is really exciting, because it's offering them new opportunities to experience those things.
And there seems to be a running theme through everything we've talked today about pressure on teachers to do more and get more engaged, the pressure on the community and schools to take more responsibility for the community. I guess to pick on you, Ian, a bit, in the Multi-Academy Trust that you're part of and that you look after, do you see that coming up more and more in the governorship conversations and those leadership conversations?
Yeah, there are. I mean, on the technology round, clearly it helps support any business, and the state we're talking here in education and the Multi-Academy Trust, we have to think of the business side as well as clearly the teaching aspect. On the basis we get the efficiency right in the back office, it's going to help ease up the front office and hopefully give time back to the teachers. So we are talking about, not only, as Victoria said, about the collection of data, clearly the quality of data. It's easy to get a lot of data that's wrong, and it's about using those checks and balances to make sure it looks right. Clearly some of the benefits of technology in maths is around how you can then do some local benchmarking, so you can start to see those trends across things and how they work. And you're only really going to do that once you start using that kind of technology to help through. Because in fairness, I don't think anyone in the room would suggest that they have lots of spare time on their hands. So we need to make sure that these things are working. Hopefully then the things that go on well in the back office will start to release the pressure on the teachers as well, because again, I think anyone in this industry knows how much teachers' time is spent not teaching. And then how do we help that? How do we make sure that that data is available? So on the engagement side of things, how do we make sure perhaps the systems are promoting things and flagging not only to parents but also to our teaching staff about how well things are going? You mentioned kind of personalised and targeted technology as well, so why can't we push out to the teaching staff as well that we're seeing this grade drop on an individual and perhaps sometimes they don't have the time to see that. So a long-winded way around to your question of are we talking about that MAT level? Absolutely. How can we spend the pound right and get a pound more than a pound's worth of value back? And that can't be done with increased manual staff.
Can I ask a question? Is it sort of helpful to have things that will be bolted on? Like I've just become a mentor for the Girls Network programme to support young girls in particular, actually, with their aspirations and everything. But are schools looking to perhaps outsource some of those things around like primary to secondary transitions or something like that, or not?
Not that I've seen. I mean, for instance, probably an unusual shape of a MAT where I am is that we've actually got 4 secondary schools, 1 primary and 1 sixth form, where quite often you end up with more primaries kind of feeding into the secondary. So we are starting to face that challenge about how can we improve things about that kind of transition through. And if you go back to technology and data, there's that thing about, well, how do you allow data to flow from one organisation to the other, which is clearly helpful, but clearly sometimes comes up against data protection rules and things like that. But I think things that we can do to help pupils as well transition from being in usually what is quite a small kind of localised primary school environment to now something much bigger. So yeah, how do we then use that to make them feel at home? Some of that is as simple as if you're using the same kind of products or tools that you use in your old school, so mathletics or things like that people might be used to, that when they go on to the secondary school they're using the same kind of thing, and therefore they feel a little bit more at home. It's not all something that everything is new. So I haven't seen it done yet or much going yet about that transfer to primary to secondary, but it's certainly, I think, something we should spend some time on.
And what about the kind of mindfulness and mental health? I mean, there's lots of stuff in the press these days about, particularly in teenagers, and helping them cope with that mental health, I guess. So we've talked earlier about that kind of primary to secondary transition and the difficulties in doing that. Is that something that schools are becoming more aware of, or do you think there's a great deal of uncertainty still in that space, which is causing a gap?
I think everyone's talking about that sort of thing. For years ago, when I was teaching, I remember I was teaching year 4, and I'm trained in NLP by Paul McKenna and Dr. Richard Bandler, so I'm interested in hypnotherapy, all of that kind of.
Am I going to start wandering around the stage shortly?
So I was doing it a long time ago, where the kids would come in from playtime, and they would come in, and I'd quieten them down, and I'd just take them down to the Garden of Dreams or wherever I was taking them to calm them down, get them focused, and the parents loved it, and also you just saw this increase in their concentration, because they used to come in and they're all over the place, and then suddenly they get calmer, and then they can focus, and then they can concentrate. It's good for their mental health and well-being. I think it's got to be done properly, and so I think teachers need to be trained in it so that you're not dabbling, because it's quite an important thing to get right, but it's not a difficult thing to train up in. But I'm all for that, and I think in the workplace as well, we're all busy, frenetic, and anything that calms us down, to gives us kind of grounding and feel that we're kind of in control of our lives a little more, is only a good thing.
I think one of the things certainly I've seen in education over the years is that it's very difficult to take some of these ideas and get them to scale outside of someone like yourself who's kind of passionate about it and driving it in the school. How do you do that, and how do you scale that out to go across many schools and many different parts of geographies? Lily, Victoria, I don't know whether you have any experience of trying to take some of the work that you do and get it to scale.
Yeah, shall I start?
Yes.
We try to work. We've got a couple of local partnership models that we essentially use as pilots, and we do those based on the Department for Education's opportunity areas, which were identified a few years ago, under Justine Greening, I think. And what we try to do is look at places where there's sort of the least opportunity and the greatest challenges for students, and where ultimately they would be less likely to consider a professional career or understand what a career in accountancy might mean, how they would get there, what the routes are. So we work in those areas, and we try to work with LEPS, the Careers and Enterprise Company. And I suppose it's always difficult to get that thing to scale. And we were actually talking about this before we came up here, but we were saying that, it is something that needs to be tackled, and the conversation is rising up the national agenda. But there's only so much at scale that schools can learn from best practice from each other. And eventually you kind of need
an outside expert, don't you?
A toolkit or a benchmark, something that just tells you, or a platform that gives you a conversation, because we have these national pilots, we come across lots of other people, chartered bodies like us, charities, loads of people doing very similar things, and where we can, we all work together, because we can work a lot better. So, for example, in Birmingham, we bumped into the Prince's Trust doing some work on something very similar to us. And we're now going to have a meeting and just join up, because it makes more sense, we'll reach more people. And, we'll try to, we need to explore that. But it's, it happens all the time, and especially with Careers and Enterprise, because their remit is so broad. So I think, right now, best practice is the way forward. As a global body, we struggle to convene that conversation.
Do you have the same struggles, Victoria, in the stuff that you're trying to do?
And I think we've kind of moved from kind of mindfulness and that kind of thing onto maybe aspirations and being inspired. And it's kind of all, I think actually those things are actually interlinked. And in my experience in a non-executive chair of a multi-academy trust, of kind of not in an area of that high deprivation, but actually a really difficult areas of parental engagement. And I think for me, the way we started to unlock that was through parental engagement.
And what do you mean by that as well?
Well, I mean, because these were areas where students kind of achieved okay, turned up, you know, generally the right uniform, where behaviour wasn't too bad.
Right.
But then that kind of often that can limit aspirations.
Yes.
And a lot of it was that parents in the local area wouldn't have thought about higher education, for example, had never been in a university. So that wasn't within their remit. So actually it was about engaging the parents in what those students could actually inspire to, and when we started engaging the parents and talking to them about local universities, getting them in, then that actually raised the aspirations of those students. So we saw in my non-executive, I know it's slightly outside the finance bit, but that was how we started to kind of really
That's
start
so interesting, because I'm on the think tank for Kidsania, and Dr. Gay Grouse always says children cannot aspire to what they don't know.
Yes.
Because he started the Children's University, and he used to work in Manchester, and he overheard a parent say, well, people like us don't do jobs like that. So, of course, that's not because they're not aspirational, but they just don't think like that, because people like us haven't done that. So that's why I'm so interested in the idea of mentoring as well, and mentoring the parents, not telling the people or judging people, inspiring and encouraging people to have higher expectations, and then that can link through with the children, can't it? And I'm a great believer, in goal setting, setting some goals that scare you a bit, that come out of your comfort zone a bit, and so that then, I do vision boards with the kids that I do confident classes for kids in schools, so you do that kind of goal setting stuff. It's more fun. They don't think it's, you know, hard and fast. You put on music, you've got loads of colour and painting and all sorts of images, but then they start to think out of the box, and then you take them through one step at a time. Well, what do you need to do? I need to learn my 7 times table first, if they're young, and then I've got to do this. Oh, and then I press this button and goes, that was easy. So in their head, they're anchoring in that it's easy to achieve that. And then you break it down, and then you take them out, and you get them to look back at how far they've come, and then you've raised their expectations. And they get hurdles and they get obstacles, but then you teach them resiliency and becoming a can-do kid about how they can then get round those obstacles.
I think it's a push and pull thing. It's educating pupils and students to say, that's what I can aspire to. I will ask not just my parents, but my brothers and sisters, my wider community, my family. But then there's the pull bit about raising aspirations of parents. So I used to be finance director of Bristol Old Vic Theatre School, and we used to do a lot of theatre in education. We used to take nativity plays and short Shakespeare plays that shortened for kind of Key Stage 2. And when those children saw live theatre, they were then asking to go to theatre productions. So once you've given them a taster, as you were saying, experience then that can raise aspirations.
Interesting.
It's fun, isn't it, how it always seems to come back to kind of widening people's vision and stretching what they think is possible. And then that in itself kind of opens up gaps for people to then grow into, either through better education standards or through just the community driving itself forward. I mean, it's quite often, especially when you're talking about more deprived areas of the country, where you're second, third, fourth generation of families who are surviving based on the benefit system, and actually breaking that cycle and changing that cycle. I think they get highlighted quite a lot. It's quite interesting to hear that actually where those things are less pervasive, it's still the same struggle. You're still trying to stretch the boundaries of that community in order to encourage the whole community to kind of move itself forward.
And it takes courage, doesn't it? And it takes confidence as well.
That's and you mentioned personal networks. That's one of the huge barriers we see all of the time. You know, if your parents have had a career in accountancy, for us, but any professional career, you're more likely to go on to one. I think the Social Mobility Commission found you're 80% more likely to go on to one. And I think it's a huge barrier for us, because how do you break that sort of knowledge barrier down if that personal network isn't there? And what we found is mentoring through previous students.
And it is funny how
together.
Yeah, it is funny how you follow your parents. I mean, Katie was here this morning talking about her experience, and she's a finance manager in a school and studied biology at university, went off and did that, tried to get a job, got a job in finance because her dad was in finance, and the whole household was in finance and understood everything about it. And I've spent, certainly my dad and my granddad were all accountants, and I spent my life avoiding being an accountant, and now I run a big chunk of a business where I spend most of my life looking at a set of bloody numbers.
But the important thing is, actually, joking aside, you pass on your values to your children, don't you? So therefore they get used to that, and it just gets handed down. And then, of course, in their 50s, they rebel and they go and be a tree surgeon or something like that.
I don't know why my children haven't followed me into the exciting world of software development.
Yeah, what have you done wrong, Ian?
I don't know.
So what about digital inclusion? Do you think that's still on the agenda for schools, or do you think that's now just accepted that everybody's got some type of bit of digital tech in their hands?
I think there's a hope more than an expectation, and I think clearly because of time and because of budgets, and I'm sure we'll talk about money at some point, schools can't cover everything they need to do, unfortunately. So I think one has to work in an environment there where you assume that your pupils have got access to these tools and things, because the majority have. But I know the stats from last year, so only a year ago, there are still allegedly 700,000 pupils out there that don't have any access to internet or computer or tablet at home. So they might have a smartphone, that might be the way of things, but clearly you're not going to be able to do a homework or anything, assessment on that. It's coming down. So again, the stats for the year before, there's 400,000 less than the year before, so it's toppling rapidly, but that's still nearly 750,000 pupils out there who cannot work outside of the school or other environment where they can get access to these things. So schools clearly, and the guys in the audience know better than I, are still trying to make sure that that digital inclusion is available. That's limited in what you can do. So that means you've got equipment at school, leaving school open later hours so that the student can and children get access to that. But that clearly creates problems for those children that are picked up from school, that haven't got the ability to be there, need to be somewhere else, or don't want to. Because if there's not internet or access at home, it clearly therefore means that it's not really in the family's maybe ability, not wish, but ability for whatever financial reasons to do it. So therefore you haven't got a home environment where parents or other family members are helping the children to do those kind of things. There's a big gap between those who get access or not. In America, we know there's the One program that you may know about, where they're trying to offer one device for every student that's out there. And they're tablets, Chromebooks, so they're very cheap to get. This is funded very much heavily by the government, and they're out and they're loaned out, and the parents sign an agreement that says if I break it or lose it, I'm going to pay this amount. But that enables everyone, literally everyone, to go home and actually do some of these things. I mentioned mathematics earlier, and those that follow it, the achievements of children that actually do some out-of-school work and enhancing these things, and clearly these programs take you through on things you're good at. If you're weak, make sure you do more of the weak stuff. It's far, far better than those that don't. That's well known. So I think there is an inclusion problem still. It's getting better, but right now I just don't think the schools have the ability or the funds to be able to handle it.
And so do we think, a question to everyone, do you think the change in government stance on budgets and releasing allegedly more money back into the education system as part of all of the crazy promises that were in the last election round, do you think we're going to see that materialise, or do you think that's another Boris smoke and mirrors?
I think the answer is not soon. If you look at the manifestos, the Conservative manifesto was predominantly reflective. It publicised a lot of the progress that had been made over the last 10 years, and I mean, it was fairly non-committal, so I think this year what we might see is quite a lot of fiddling around the edges. But that said, there is a spending review coming later in the year, so any big changes that are likely to come through are likely to come through there. There's obviously various bits of money for teacher training and implementation of the new programmes that's available. So yes, there could
potentially.
be. But it's the next 5 years from this summer.
Right.
He's not a details man, though, is he? And as a former deputy head, I also think that you're putting back money that you took away over the years of austerity. Yeah. So are we any better off? Not particularly. I think the jury's out on that one. Oh, we got quite cross there.
Yeah. You bring politics in.
We're asking teachers to do more.
Yeah, poor old teachers. They're just... Well, I used to describe it when I was deputy as trying to get on a train with all these suitcases, and no one would take a suitcase away from me. They just gave me another suitcase. And I'm trying to get on the train. So teachers are really under pressure.
Yeah, you're delivering on your results. You've got, SEN and EBD schools to keep up with, and safeguarding and all of that.
Oh, and mindfulness now as well.
Yeah, so there's a lot.
Yeah, there is.
The problem is, I think the recent stats were that teachers' times per week has gone down from 56 to 53 hours, and I think we're meant to be really grateful, allegedly, for that.
Oh, they're up
3 hours
70 hours a week, I
saved.
thought they were doing. All that marking and prepping, gosh.
Well, having finished, going to finish that one off, feisty topic of conversation. Any questions from anybody in the audience that want to ask? Yes, please.
Reputation of maths. I mean, I work in a 10 school, do the finances for a 10 school trust, so we're changing our language because I think the reputation is increasingly negative in articles, in large sessions of professional bodies. So we're a charitable trust, we don't refer to academies, we never refer to MAT anymore. As we refer to schools, we're trustees, we're not directors. What's your view on the representation of MATs generally? Are they doing a good job? And what do we do if we feel it is negative representation?
I mean, my personal experience, I'm kind of all for them. I've seen some really good practice. I've seen some schools that have really struggled and either voluntarily joined a MAT or been rebrokered in, and I've seen some really good school improvement. It's helped, being able to join up the financial side of things and look at those efficiencies. So I've seen some really good practice, but I think you were talking about calling schools academies or schools. I've seen both. I've seen multi-academy trusts where they're very much holding their hat on that academy, and this is improvement and MAT, and some which have kind of paid a more, like yours is a more lower profile, noble schools first and we're kind of academies kind of second. I mean, I think there's going to be some settling down in the sector. I don't know whether I've seen another single academy trust been approved. I don't think they get approved anymore, do they? You can only approve free schools as part of a multi-academy trust. And I'm now personally starting to see mergers now. And I think you'll see. So I think my personal thing is they're there to stay and they're there to become stronger, but it'll be about mergers and about single academy trusts joining multi-academy trusts. So I think if you're a strong trust, both educationally and within your financial sustainability and within your community and your engagement, I think you'll do better and probably be asked to grow, I would have thought.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because I review the papers on Talk Radio every month, and I think the public's perception of academies is a low one. That semantically, I think you might be right. The idea of talking about trusts and things in the public eye, yes, and I do think there's a problem with that. So I understand your question from the public persona.
Do you think anything hits the public eye other than the chief exec's salary?
Yeah.
It's the only
I was
thing
going to say, you
seems to
see
be out
that,
there
don't you? You see all the edges of the kind of academies sector where things aren't working quite so well, or where like you say, the salaries get mentioned. That definitely deflates public opinion.
Because the other stats are, technology in the deceit's got to be backed by stats, isn't it? But actually 80% of those, I won't never say the word failing, underperforming or sponsored schools that have gone towards MAT, 80% of those have moved from underperforming to being good or outstanding within a couple of years. So that alone should show actually it's a good job. Or we can be the press and spin it around and focus on the 20%. I think the job now of government, and all of us, I guess, is to help those people that have tried to become an academy or a trust and haven't done so well. Well, how can you take the model from the 80% that were good and try and help the 20% that weren't? Because would they have been any better off still staying under the old system where they were clearly still underperforming and there are more financial constraints?
I don't think it helps either that the government haven't really set out a clear policy on what the academy movement's going to be and how far it's going to go. Are they going to push all schools? Are they going to leave it as it is? Are they going to tinker it along? Are they going to encourage them to merge? Are they going to create big ones that are pretty much the same as local authorities were before? Or are they going to keep everybody... It's that ambiguity there makes it really difficult for not just the public to understand it, but also the press to talk about it and write about it because there isn't that clear direction, which always leads to uncertainty, which again has an impact on public opinion.
Yeah, and I think there's still a challenge as well around the primary schools. Secondary schools, most are academies now, but there's a challenge around primaries because it takes quite a lot of effort to bring another primary school within a multi-academy trust. Bring a secondary school in, it's a lot kind of easier. So I think there's a real challenge there about what to do with the majority of primary schools are still LA maintained, and I don't know whether there's a solution for that. So that's kind of, for me, is one of the next big challenges for this government to decide what to do there.
Yeah, agreed.
Well, there is one of the other report that's out now, of course, in there from the ex-DFE advisor that suggests about moving everyone to, what's the phrase, a national school trust, I think it's the name for them. So rename multi-academy trust, because clearly that's completely different.
Yeah.
But actually now take away the grant maintained status and make everyone the same status school and directly funded by government. But you would still run under a MAT structure where they were, but schools would have the option to leave it. I mean, schools already do, I think, don't they? So I'm not quite sure where they go to if they decide to leave their localised kind of trust. But that's one that's been thrown into the mix now, which is why I'm saying, well, why don't we take all the goods we've learnt from multi-academies and the bads we've learnt from elsewhere and do a new thing? So whether that will gain any traction, I have no idea.
Yeah, interesting. Great question. Any other questions? Okay. Any closing comments from the panel that they think are relevant or kind of want to share with
I've just
this
got a
audience?
question, because clearly speaking to Victoria about some of the things. Has anyone been through their kind of SRMA review? Or been one, or have one line coming up? Clearly there's now a focus from government about your kind of financial health.
Do you-
Yeah, we had to sign up for one as part of last year's SIF
Yeah.
after we awarded the funds, and we paid nothing.
I think there's a bit of a backlog for the bid ones. 'cause there's
Everybody
a-
needs to fill
not
in
a
this
backlog.
form,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
forms get stuck.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think eventually it'll work through the sector, but they're obviously prioritising those schools and trusts that are in most need. I've done quite a few SRMA deployments. Mine have been from an SRMA side of things. I've got some really good feedback because I've worked alongside business managers and finance directors, and it's been and also the CEO's been part of that conversation. For example, the most recent one I did, the chair wanted to be involved in the finders meeting and the chair of the finance committee. So it was all a big, kind of a really good discussion. So I really try to engage leaders in that process. I don't know whether they're all like that. I've had some really good feedback about it being really useful. I think the thing to bear in mind is when you come to the kind of at the end of the day, you've written your report, you've got to put a number on it. What is the potential saving? It's potential savings. So it's things for the trust to consider, but it is the multi-academy trust decision on what they decide to implement, why and when.
Yeah, because there's been commentary about only half of the findings are deliverable. The schools don't believe it. But again, you spin that to a positive, that means that half the findings and suggestions have been accepted as we hadn't thought of this before and could be achievable. So I think it was at the 72 schools in the pilot produced potential savings of 35 million over 3 years, and they've all agreed they think they can deliver half of them. So suddenly, just that amount of schools, there's £17 million to be paid, which can go back into teaching staff and other things, and all things we're really struggling to fund. Yeah, so I was just interested to see whether the wave had come your way, really, whether that was something you're either being pushed towards or had thought about.
I think the answer to that question is no.
No.
Any other closing comments?
I suppose I've got one on digital inclusion.
Okay.
It's a very small plug as well. But I suppose just looking at the government role and that, I mean, I'm biased, that's where I'm coming from, but I think government progress on convening the sort of education, edtech providers and then the schools and colleges is going to be quite slow. There's clearly very patchy support on that already. It might, there might be something that comes through in spending review that will probably depend on representations from the sector. But I think in the meantime, I'd really encourage anybody in the room that's able to look out at the software that is there already. And not just talking from an ACCA perspective, there's loads I mean, we've got diagnostic tools for students at that sort of secondary 14 up level to, for them to explore whether the subjects that they take now are relevant to the career that they might want to pursue. But that's just ACCA. There's every sort of chartered or membership body has that kind of promotional tool. But the other thing I would say is there's an amazing charity called the Good Things Foundation. You might have heard of them. But they work on digital inclusion. So I'd really recommend looking them up and seeing if they're in your area because they have some great schemes and it's all free to use.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Thank
you very much
Thank
to the panel for spending some time talking to us and for the questions from the audience as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.